What's up, gun nuts? It's Ferrari Steve, and today we're going to talk about upgrading the trigger group in your Sig Sauer MPX. We'll talk about why you might want to upgrade it, we'll talk about how to upgrade it, and then we're going to talk about why you might not want to upgrade it, and some potential warranty issues you could run into if you attempt this. But first, let's do a quick safety check. Eject the magazine, lock the bolt open, visually and manually inspect, and the gun is clear. So let's talk about why you might want to upgrade the trigger. Maybe you don't like the trigger, and if you don't, you're not alone. There's a few people who aren't really crazy about this trigger. For me, the only complaint I have about the trigger is its weight. It really doesn't have that much creep and that much grit, at least the one that I got, so from that standpoint, I really don't have a lot of complaints. It's what I expect for a stock trigger. However, if it's got a mil-spec trigger, and that's kind of one of the selling points, right, is that it's got a mil-spec AR trigger group, and you can drop any mil-spec compatible AR trigger group into it if you want. The top end of the spec on mil-spec is 9 pounds, and therefore one would expect that our trigger pull should not exceed 9 pounds. Well, 8 pounds 13. So on the first one it didn't, but I gotta be honest, that's the lowest one I've pulled. Of course it's gonna happen on camera, right? 9 pounds 7 ounces. That's more consistent with what I've been pulling as I test. Let's do another one. 9 pounds 13 ounces. Yeah, that's consistent with what I've been measuring. So I noticed it was really heavy as I was firing it, and I thought, boy, that feels really, really heavy for a mil-spec trigger, and it is, in fact, right at that upper end, and maybe even a little farther over. I prefer about 6 pounds on a defensive trigger. And that's what this gun is for me, is primarily a defensive weapon. And so I thought, well, let's go ahead and change it out. And as I've been experimenting with the trigger groups in this, I've learned a lot. So let's bust it open and kind of talk about what I've learned, and maybe you can learn some of the same stuff. So I've got a field strip video for this weapon, so you can just follow that if you need to. But if you're familiar with AR style weapons, again, this is not an AR, but it does break down just like an AR. Controls are like an AR. It has a lot of things in common with the AR so that people who are used to working with the AR platform can quickly switch over. Okay, so here we go. A standard AR, and not even AR style. This is an AR trigger group. Or so you might think, right? And there it is. And don't ever dry fire it without catching the hammer. You don't want this slamming up against there. But yeah, this is a pretty standard AR trigger group, right? Removing it is just like removing any AR trigger. Let's get my punch here. Hopefully we don't need a hammer. Let's see if we get lucky. All right, so for our hammer pin, we can. Nope, I'm gonna need the hammer. Need the hammer for the hammer pin. Here we go. All right, be careful. There is a lot of spring tension. We'll put our pin right here. There's a lot of spring tension on this hammer, so hold it securely away from you when you pull this pin out, and then very gently pull it out. All right, we'll look at that in a second. And let's pop out our trigger pin. Shouldn't need the hammer for that. Pin comes out. And our trigger pin has this little notch in it, remember that. So the hammer pin has the notch in the middle, trigger pin has the notch on the edge. That's worth remembering. Now you would expect that once you pull your punch out, you can just grab this trigger and pull, right? Nope. The safety is actually holding it in place. So the trick for removing the trigger, you might look at this and go, oh, I can see there's a punch there and I can just punch that and pull it. No, don't do that. There's a simpler way. Just get a little screwdriver. Oh, the disconnector will come out. The disconnector is going to be important in our discussion today. So let's give him a special place of honor right there. We're going to talk about that disconnector. So he will come out, but the whole rest of the trigger assembly is being held in place by that safety. So flip it over. Pop open, use a little screwdriver or your fingernail or whatever. Pop open the pistol grip, and then grab your little Allen head bit and pull out that screw. Take it all the way loose. Then very gently bring this down, because you'll see we've got some springs there. And let's take out all the normal stuff that, again, on an AR would normally come out. And on an AR you'd probably lose. There's a spring in there. There's a spring here for your detent. There's a couple plungers that should come out. If the first plunger doesn't come out, move the safety around until it comes out. So there's our safety plunger. There's our little takedown lever, detent plunger, and both of their springs. And they're different sizes, so they don't go in the wrong holes. So we'll remember that. All right. Now, once that is, our little takedown pin came out too. Now we can move our safety to 180 degrees from the safe position. And that moves that little flat spot on the safety so that you can now reach in and get that entire trigger assembly out. Now let's put this aside. Let's look at this trigger assembly. I'll reassemble it. So it looks like it did sitting in the gun. Here we go. Now this looks like a pretty standard AR trigger, right? With this little, what Sig calls the trigger bridge. And this trigger bridge sits here and rides up and down. Well, actually it doesn't ride up and down. It just kind of sits here and parks. And so it stops the disconnector from going any higher than that. But if you'll notice a little wear mark on it, that's because the hammer strikes there, and this prevents this part of the hammer from hitting the disconnector and causing some damage. Now, Sig apparently thinks this is so important that they say if you do not have this trigger bridge in the gun, it voids your warranty. So your first thought might be, okay, well, let's see if we can get this trigger bridge to work with another mil-spec trigger. So, okay, let's try that. Let's take the trigger bridge. We'll keep both our stock hammer and the entire stock trigger assembly by themselves. In fact, let's put the pins with them so that we know where they are and we don't lose stuff. I'll put that in there, and we'll store this there. Okay, so pins and trigger stuff for stock right there. I went with the ALG QMS trigger. It is by the sister company of Geisley Automatics, by Amy Lynn Geisley, who is Bill Geisley's wife. She runs ALG, and they just take the standard mil-spec triggers that get issued to everybody, and they make sure they keep the good ones. Then they clean them up a little bit, and they try to reduce some of the creep, and they try to just kind of get as good as you can for a slightly refurbished mil-spec trigger that doesn't cost more than 46 bucks. If you want to pay another 20 bucks, you can get their ACT, their Advanced Combat Trigger, and that is basically the QMS with an additional coating to try and make it more slippery, and then they polish it. And really, the only reason I don't like the ACT, that I prefer the QMS, is on the QMS, the trigger is gray, whereas it's polished kind of silver on the ACT, and I don't like that look. So really, I went with it for looks. They don't really feel that different from my experience. But anyway, we should just be able to drop these in, right? Now the safety is out, so that part's easy, and we'll leave it out for most of what we're doing. So let's just drop our trigger back in. So you might say, oh, well, I don't want to void the warranty, so I need to put this on, right? Okay, well, it fits. Sure, all right, there it is. Fits on there. And at first glance, you might think, oh, okay, that works. And I will tell you from experience, you can go ahead and reassemble this, put this in, and put in the aftermarket trigger and hammer group, and it will work until you put the upper back on, and then your bolt will not close. You'll pull back your charging handle, and the bolt will get stuck, and you'll have to go through some machinations to get it all undone. So in this configuration, if you just move the trigger bridge to an ALG mil-spec trigger, and I would argue it's probably going to be the case with most mil-spec triggers, maybe not, and if you know a difference, please tell me in the comments, but you can't just put the bridge on it. It causes the weapon to malfunction. So that's out. Let's examine why. And the secret lies in the disconnector itself. So I'm going to put the bridge up here because it's important. We're going to keep our aftermarket parts down here and our stock parts right here. And now the geometry is a little bit different, as you can see on the hammer, but the important parts look about the same. That's not going to be where the issue is. The issue is going to be right here. Let's pull this pin out. And you can tell which are the aftermarket ALG pins because they have Oh, there we go. That's what we need. They have these little notches, 3 notches. And let's pull out our stock one as well. So stock pin, stock trigger, ALG trigger, stock disconnector, and ALG disconnector. So if you put them side by side, let's put them, we'll put the stock one in front. And we look at the front and we line them up perfectly. Things look good so far. Yep, things look really good so far. No major differences. In fact, it looks like they're lining up nicely. But look at the back. Or in fact, there we go. That's what we want to see. I want to make sure we're lined up. The holes are lined up perfectly. And this is lined up and down right there. Look at that. You can see that the ALG mil-spec version rides higher and that this Sig one is cut a little lower. And that means this radius is different. And in fact, that's the difference where it interfaces with the trigger bridge. On the stock piece, it interfaces right here before it starts going up on that radius. But on the ALG piece, and this might be the case with most mil-spec triggers, it rides, of course, drop it, Steve, there you go. It rides right here, kind of in that notch. And this is what's causing the malfunction. It's not riding quite right there and isn't allowing this to come up all the way. And you'll get the trigger sticking and you'll get the bolt sticking. It's no bueno. So you might try to solve the problem by saying, okay, well then why don't we'll use the aftermarket hammer, we'll use the aftermarket QMS trigger, but we'll just put the Sig disconnector piece in there because that will allow the trigger bridge to fit in there and work, right? Well, let's see. Let's drop it in. And you can use a slave pin if you want. If you're new to AR triggers, that might be helpful to you, but I found it's a little bit of practice, you can get it. So slide that pin in, wiggle it around so that everything lines up nicely. And once you get it started, you can tap it a little bit to get it in there, or not. Well, kids, that should go in easier than that. Let's see why it doesn't. Line it up. There we go. That went a lot easier. And line it up over here and push through. There we go. Had something wrong. All right, so let's see. Just without, we don't have our hammer in, but trigger function, okay, that looks as expected. And with the safety, yeah, it catches it, and the safety down. It allows me to go deeper. All right, so far so good. So again, we've got the Sig disconnector. This is the one that came with the ALG piece, and the ALG everything else. Now we're gonna put in our hammer. And one of the things that's kind of cool, oh, we're gonna need that pin out, aren't we? One of the things that's kind of cool, you notice those notches in the notches in that pin. On the trigger pin, these little notch, that little notch right here, and there's one, if I can get this out, on the other side. There we go. These two notches here, they're gonna ride. They're gonna allow the spring to sit right there and capture it a little bit once it's in the gun. Not the hammer pin, but the trigger pin, which is the same style pin. It's just not how we're using it in this setup. Here we go. Gonna put our hammer in there. And when you do this, make sure you get these springs forward. You can put it in wrong. It will go in like this. You won't get any spring tension. So make sure it's wrapped around so that it makes sense. You know, that when you do this, it's got some spring tension on it. Lay it in. There we go. Get your pin ready. Line it up. It's hard to do and keep it away from my body. I normally hold up against myself when I do this. And the pin goes flying. And again, there is a lot of spring tension here. Ah, okay, I'm glad that happened. If you're having trouble doing this, check your safety. It's probably in the wrong position. So if you have it on fire, you'll notice it's a lot easier to get it into the position you need. Except for right now, when the camera's rolling, and it seems to be really, really tricky. and fire. There we go. There it is. Once you've got it most of the way, you can turn it over and kind of look through the other side. Give it a little bit of love if you need until it gets to the other side, and then line it up right there. That's lined up now. There we go. Okay. Now again, at first glance, you would think it's working okay. So safe. Oh, that's okay. Go to fire. Oh, that's good, right? So we've solved the problem. We have the ALG trigger, but we also have the Sig trigger bridge, and we haven't voided our warranty, right? Well, I don't know. I guess it's up to the guys at Sig, but there is a problem. While this looks like it may work just fine, listen. There's that one click, and you can see the trigger actuate there, right? All right. Listen to this. There's a second click. And once you go to that second click, the trigger will not work. I think it's catching on the very leading edge of the trigger where it catches onto that the hammer portion down below. But the only way to defeat that is to get a punch and punch that through and listen again. There. You hear it kind of relieve that pressure, you hear it kind of tick, and now it's okay. All right, let's put that pin all the way back through again. One click, works fine. But if for some reason something happens and it comes back with a lot of force and goes down even farther than it should, that second click, you're stuck, even though we are in the fire position. Yeah, again, for a defensive gun, I don't like that kind of reliability problem. So, again, the answer is we're going to have to take that trigger bridge out. So let's do that. There, we get that little release there. Now you can release the trigger. Then you can drive that pin all the way out. Remember, again, there's a lot of spring tension on this hammer. So let it out. Keep your finger there and be careful. The good news is if you did put an aftermarket trigger in and you have this all assembled, the aftermarket one will slide out just fine after you obviously remove this pin. So we've got pin, that's the ALG pin, and here comes the ALG trigger. Let's move that out. There we go. So, what does this mean? Well, you have two choices. One, you can keep the stock trigger. And if that's what you want to do, then that's what you should do. Or two, you can go ahead and put the aftermarket trigger in, and it will work. But you can't have this trigger bridge in there. Now, the folks at Sig, no one quite knows the logic behind why they want it in here, but I do know that gun companies are generally trying to make money, and if they are making parts to put in the gun, there's probably a good reason. It costs them money to make this part and install it, so I don't think they would have done it without good reason. Again, I think it's, I know it's making impact here. I can see it, that when this is coming back for another shot, it's obviously impacting and slamming there. And I don't know how that's working on the ALG one, or even if that's a consideration, right? If it comes back, right, catches here, I don't know if it's hitting here or not, or even if it's getting down that far, and if it's going to wear here. I don't really know. What I do know is I don't think it's reliable to put the stock trigger bridge on. I've seen it malfunction myself, and I don't think it's advisable to put the stock disconnector with an aftermarket. I think you need to keep the Sig parts together, and I'm sure the people at Sig will love hearing that. And I think you need to keep your mil-spec parts, your aftermarket mil-spec parts together. So if you want to put in a mil-spec AR trigger, yes, it will drop in a Sig MPX. And from what I read, and I'll put a link down here for an article you can read, it does void your warranty. So the choice is yours. Either aftermarket, if you can't live with that 9-pound pull, you can go the aftermarket trigger and then you're on your own. Or you can live with it and maybe try to clean up the trigger, do some polishing. That might be what I try next. But I just wanted you to see firsthand that it does not work to put this trigger bridge in an aftermarket trigger, and it does not work to run this trigger bridge with the stock disconnector in place of an aftermarket disconnector. So I won't go through the rigmarole of putting it all back together. I just believe that I can. And this is Ferrari Steve reminding you to stay safe out there. And staying safe means, not pushing the modifications to be done past your limits or the limits of the gun. What you do, totally up to you. Totally up to you. If you want to avoid your warranty, it's a free country and you can do that. But if you don't, now you know kind of more about the reasoning as to what this little trigger bridge does. So this is Ferrari Steve. Thanks for watching. Please go ahead and subscribe if you like what you see. Stay safe out there.